Welcome to the History Maven and another episode in our Black Dahlia case saga. It was the morning of March 14, 1947, and all of Los Angeles had been hunting the person who tortured and butchered Elizabeth Short for 2 months now. But in nearby Venice Beach, it was a beautiful morning. The sun rose in a swell of peach and gold over the water, and the beach caretaker, John Dillon, he happened to be making his morning rounds when he spotted a stack of clothing on the sand, which was nothing too unusual. People were always coming to neck on the beach and happened to leave a sock, a pair of underwear, a skirt. But he walked over to investigate. The pile of clothing contained a man's navy herringbone coat, white shorts, undershirt, jockey underwear, and a pair of tan moccasins. Just typical yachting or boating wear for the era. He looked around, wondering, what he said to himself? I bet someone just went in for a chilly dip into the Pacific. Everyone's really healthy in California. They love to get their exercise. But the beach was eerily quiet. So he ran his hand along the inside collar of the coat, but there was no tag. So he checked the shorts. But the tag had been ripped out of the shorts, too. In fact, none of the clothes had any identifying marks. So that's when he noticed a neatly folded note that was tucked inside one of the shoes. And it read, "To whom it may concern, I've waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but they have not. As I'm too much a coward to turn myself in, this is the best way out. I couldn't help that or this. Sorry, Mary." John called on the lifeguard captain, who quickly rounded up his fellow guards. They searched the ocean for a body, but there was nothing. They immediately notified the police, and the police were just as stumped by this apparent suicide note. Yeah, this note could have been for just some bored teens who took some of Dad's clothes from the closet and played a little prank, or it could have been the person responsible for Elizabeth Short's death. Like maybe the guilt got to them and they tossed themselves in the ocean, or at least they hoped to make the police believe they did. But one thing's got me, and it's probably making you wonder too. Are you wondering why someone has to remove their jockey underwear to drown themselves? That's kind of suspicious, right? Particularly since the weight of the clothing would pull a person under the waves. But this wasn't the only written clue in the Black Dahlia case, and not the weirdest one, not by a long shot. In fact, newspapers and police, they could barely keep up with the influx of notes and written clues. Case detective Harry Hansen said that over his lifetime, he received more than 400 written tips and letters. People were going up to this man's house, knocking on his door, and handing him tips. That's how involved everyone wanted to be in the case. The alleged killer sent many notes under the name Black Dahlia Avenger. We already did videos on that previously. You can look in our description for a link. We talked about the letters and postcards that he sent. But this time, we're focusing on some fascinating written tips and clues in this case. And the first one is a conspiracy. Let's talk about the conspiracy letter that was not shared with the public at the time. It blamed the old policeman who lived on Figueroa Street in Los Angeles. The woman who composed it, Edith Thomas, well, she wrote to LAPD and told them a story here, but they never responded. So she went over their heads to the then president, J. Edgar Hoover, to explain what she had seen. She wrote that an old policeman that lived in her building on South Figueroa Street had been tormenting everyone in the building. Old, mean, obnoxious codger, getting in disagreements with everyone. But everybody's got someone like that who's ever lived in an apartment. You know someone like that. But on the night of January 14th, the old policeman took it way too far. Edith claimed she heard a woman screaming, and the policeman, who was named Hawkins, well, he was screaming back at her with obscenities. Is that unusual? No, that's not the incriminating part. I mean, domestic disagreements, unfortunately, are common in every town and city around the world. But what Edith saw next shook her to her very core. The old policeman was being carted off in handcuffs by LAPD. His clothing was drenched in blood, and he was followed by officers who were carrying out something on a stretcher. Edith got in close, pushed her way to the stretcher, and she saw the body of a naked, hacked-up woman. Her face had been cut from ear to ear. She was horrified. She figured the man would go to prison for her life. But shockingly, the next day, the body of Elizabeth Short was found in a lot far away with those exact wounds. And the policeman was back in his apartment like nothing had ever happened. Edith said, "This has to be a cover-up, President Hoover." Police replied that they did investigate, and Beth hadn't been seen by anyone else at the building in weeks leading to her disappearance or murder. None of the building residents had any recollection of these incidents involving an old policeman. Now, we just have to play devil's advocate and question the credence of this story. There was a lot of heat on police prior to this case for taking bribes. A lot of them had already gone to court for taking bribes from organized crime groups, aka the mafia. So there was already a lot of heat on them, and there was heat on them in their investigation. On the federal level, officers were being taken in saying they'd done a poor job of collecting evidence and doing questioning in the Black Dahlia case. So I don't know if they'd want any more heat on them. And okay, this is the big part. Would police on the scene really bring out a naked, butchered corpse into a hallway full of people in an active homicide case in which they intended to cover up? That part doesn't make sense. A lot of tips were just regarding what I call barroom confessions. Probably most of those 400 were people had heard drunken jokes about people saying they were the Black Dahlia killer when they were in cocktail lounges. Or sometimes people would make false confessions to shock their friends. Or this was a big one. People would threaten their romantic partners by saying, "I'm going to do you like I did the Black Dahlia." That happened a lot. But a significant tip was mailed to Sergeant Finis Brown all the way from North Carolina in 1950, and it included this really beautifully executed pencil sketch of the suspect. It's important to note that an eyewitness to the Jeanne French murder, which happened only a month after Beth was killed, they said that they spotted someone on the scene. The witness said it was a man with dark hair and a small mustache in that murder case, too. So it's possible. The mustachioed man in the drawing is one of the pieces of evidence that Steve Hodel uses to point to his father, Dr. George Hodel, as the infamous Black Dahlia slayer. And does he look like him? Yes, he certainly shares the trait of small dark features, furry upper lip. His ears even kind of look like his. But that mustache does not make you guilty. Mustaches were all the rage thanks to the swashbuckling actor and well-known statutory rapist, Errol Flynn. His pencil-thin stash inspired quite a lot of imitation back then. In fact, I got to tell you who I thought this was. When I first spotted this drawing, I thought it was a young Salvador Dali, or let me pronounce it correctly, Salvador Dali. I'm going to say it wrong the rest of the time, okay? Let's make a deal on that. Dali actually was living in California in the 1940s, but it doesn't seem like he and Beth were traveling in the same circles because he was sort of hosting parties for the creme de la creme of the art and film world, and oh, poor Beth. She was hitting up Section 8 veterans for hamburger money. That would have been me too, girl. Don't feel bad about it. Plus, it's widely accepted that Beth was killed by what they called a sex slayer at the time, and Senor Dali openly declared that not only was he not interested in participating in the act of sex, he was impotent, only having had sex with his wife twice during their decades-long marriage. Besides, if the artist of this drawing wanted to give a tip, she could have just said, "Talk to Dali." I mean, he was pretty stinking famous. Like, his name was everywhere back then. Now, I couldn't pin down Dolly's exact location for Beth's missing week in January 1947, but I can tell you that he was in New York by mid-February. Now, old Sal, he was not the kind of artist who just threw paint on a canvas while downing a rum and coke. No, he was a very prolific commercial artist who created neat, complex pieces that took a long time. And in 1947, it was a huge year for him. He had so much work to do. He not only created original works to be exhibited, he created advertisements, Christmas cards, book illustrations, animation scenes for Disney film, original prints for an exhibit in Cleveland. To put it bluntly, Mr. Dolly didn't have time to torture the Black Dahlia. But this brings us to our next tip. An envelope that was sent to the district attorney in 1947, and honestly, I'm not 100% on which letter this was attached to, but let's focus on what we have here. Now, the front of the letter had a note written in pencil, and it has been read two ways. Most commonly as "Sorry, Greenwich Village, not Cotton Club," but also as "Sunny, Greenwich Village, not Cotton Club." I'm pretty sure it says "sorry" based on the R's and the rest of the letters there. But let's talk about both Greenwich Village and the Cotton Club before we dig deeper into this clue. Both reference two well-known New York City spots. Greenwich Village is a neighborhood long known for its artistic community and as being America's first gay neighborhood. And the Cotton Club was a famous jazz venue that featured black performers, though black patrons were barred from entering until the 1930s. The Cotton Club, it was the place to be in New York for celebrities, wealthy businessmen, both legitimate and the wise guy types. This envelope came 3 years before that drawing tip, and I'm pretty sure that this is the tip that came with the letter that suggested that folk singer Woody Guthrie should be investigated for the Black Dahlia killing. So he was best known for writing This Land Is Your Land and inspiring future songwriting phenom Bob Dylan. Guthrie actually lived in Greenwich Village in the late 1940s. See, Woody Guthrie was stalking a woman, sending her like these weird newspaper clippings and some pretty gross sexually explicit letters via the mail. So she contacted police and she said, you might want to look into him for this murder of Beth Short because his brother actually lives in Los Angeles and he visits him a lot. Guthrie was pretty quickly cleared for the fact that he wasn't near the West Coast at the time. The strange behaviors he had been exhibiting, like writing these gross letters to women, that got him landed in a mental hospital eventually, and they diagnosed him with Huntington's disease, which is what was causing his unusual behavior. But maybe this letter doesn't reference the Greenwich Village in New York City, but a gay bar in LA that was located at 8852 Sunset Boulevard. That's okay. Y'all ready for some weird coincidence time? Salvador Dali, sorry to go back to him, was in Greenwich Village the month after Beth was found, and he lived just feet from the Greenwich Village Club in LA during the time that Beth was killed. So, okay. Salvador Dali, just a weird coincidence. The police were getting Black Dahlia tips. The DA, newspapers, even taxi drivers. Taxi drivers were getting tips handled to them. Why? But a cab driver said he was grabbing some lunch. I don't know what people ate back then. I don't know, a tuna sandwich maybe. When he came back to his car, he found a note in the glove box that said, 20,000, I'll give BD up. Is it a go? Okay, he delivered that to detectives right away, and they found a fingerprint that didn't belong to the cab driver on the note, but they didn't have that print in their records. So, does this seem super random that like a killer would try to bargain for information with the cab driver? I mean, it might have been another prank, or it could have been like a desperate soul just trying to get some money to feed their vices. But there's one interesting thing to note, that cab drivers were often pimps at the time in LA. It's possible that cab driver in this situation had some tie to Beth, or they could have been just one of the numerous informants that the police worked with and that the author of the note knew this. Was that drawing of the mustache man the only visual tip? No, it actually wasn't. Many of the tips from this case are lost to time, but I want to take a look at a couple more, including the famous poison pen case. One of the notes received by news outlets was a patchwork letter with a scratched out, barely visible photo of a young dark haired man, and it proclaimed, here is the photo of the werewolf killer. I saw him kill her, a friend. Yep, that was actually our friend Armand Robles. We discussed this teenager in the previous video, so link in the description. Other tips were from people who held the belief that they had seen Beth during her missing week. Every black-haired girl that they had ever met, they would say, was that Elizabeth Short? Was that the Black Dahlia? In their minds, they, became convinced that that had been her, and so they would offer tips to LAPD based on those spurious encounters. But now, time for the game played throughout history. Blame the gays. Perhaps because almost all of the men Beth dated said she didn't have sex with them, reporters began to hint that Beth was a lesbian by writing that, it was odd she had so many female friends, that she liked the company of women. Is it weird for a 22-year-old to have friends of all genders or sexualities for the matter? No. The papers outright suggested she might have been killed by a hate-crazed female pervert. For a time, police too focused their energy on questioning the gay community of Los Angeles, possibly because it was rumored that Beth stopped by to watch a drag show at the Flamingo Club, which was a gangster bar allegedly owned by Mickey Cohen, but it also had a hoppin' and poppin' queer community. And this caused people to really run with that lesbian angle. Several tips came in that Beth was seen in the company of lesbians the week she disappeared. One such letter told police that on January 13th, a Mannish group of women locked a drunk girl in a car on Sunset Boulevard, and the author of the tip, said that the girl resembled the Black Dahlia. The news running suggestions that Beth preferred the company of women led to a load of confessions from women who claimed they killed Beth in a moment of jealousy, or they claimed that their lesbian friends murdered the Black Dahlia. All of this talk about murderous homosexuals made the city crack down on gay bars. Public officials started dealing out arrests to drag queens and those who hired them. They were even successful in closing down 8 of the 10 LA gay bars by slapping staff with morality charges. To understand how Angelenos felt about the gay community in the 1940s, you have to understand that prior to this, in the 1930s, Los Angeles had like a huge blossoming gay community that was not only tolerated, but it was kind of celebrated by young Hollywood players. There were even several of what people call pansy clubs at the time that were filled with all the movie and radio actors. But post-war, a shift came into society. Americans had seen a lot of violence and cruelty. They had killed and been prisoners of war. They had starved and sacrificed. They had lost their husbands and brothers and sisters and daughters. And they knew that under the Axis powers, many had undergone much worse. So not only were Americans trying to escape the darkness of the war years, people had what is known as empathy burnout. They didn't want to accept any more societal changes. They didn't want to make any sacrifices. They didn't want to have to tackle any more society problems. They didn't want to be understanding anymore. They wanted things to be easy and traditional. And they believed the answer was like a heteronormative nuclear Christian family, where a glamorous wife stays home with children and the ever-wise husband works and makes decisions for the little lady and their brood of perfect, healthy children. Oh, they go to church on Sundays, of course, too. Don't forget that. People who lived outside this formula were deemed degenerates, and the majority of post-war Americans believed that to choose such a lifestyle was to invite tragedy. Under this ideology, if Beth were a lesbian, then folks wouldn't have to extend her much sympathy or empathy. They could tell themselves she brought it on herself. Most of the tips to the police, though, were empty of any real value or substance. They were sent by well-meaning people who wanted the case solved, or others who were letting their imaginations get the best of them. Beth was this beautiful, mysterious, tragic figure, and she inspired a lot of fantasy because of this. That's why we get all these conflicting narratives on her life, that she was a man-hungry, lesbian, virgin, prostitute, wholesome gold digger. The truths, they get kind of lost among the fantasies, but that's what makes this case so eternally fascinating and damn impossible to solve. But why let that stop us from trying? So please subscribe if you want to catch my future video on like the Black Dahlia suspects. I swear it is eventually coming, and I feel like I keep teasing this one, but it's just taking all eternity because I keep finding new suspects and angles on this case. But up next, we're feeding another obsession of mine, the Beatles, with a video on Beatles theories and scandals. It is going to be so scrumptious and juicy. Oh, God, you're still here? Damn, thank you. Thank you for staying around. I've got something for you. Because you made it to the bitter end of this video. This video is goofy as hell, and so am I. Let's roll with this. Close your eyes. Make a wish. Blow. Go ahead. Aren't you glad you stayed to the end of the video? Look, I'm the History Maven sending you peace and love. Thank you guys so much for coming, and see you in the next video. Maven out.